Greetings. This is Resilience Radio. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show and owner of Resilience Occupational Therapy. Today's episode is a little bit different than usual. It's the first of, I hope, many panel discussions with various healthcare guests. And as usual, if any specific advice is given, realize that it is not necessarily meant for you, in the sense that everyone has their own healthcare needs, and any specific advice might not resonate or be pertinent to your healthcare conditions. Additionally, none of the opinions are necessarily the opinions of myself or Resilience Occupational Therapy. I'm really excited about this episode. We have multiple guests on, which I'll be introducing them in just a moment. And I do want to mention that Melanie Myers, the naturopath, partway through the episode did need to run off to deal with some things, and she sort of disappears from the last quarter of the episode. So I wanted to make note of that. Today's guests are Rosemary Gladstar, herbalist, Melanie Myers, naturopathic doctor, and Josh Singer, an acupuncturist. It's really great to have you all on today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yep, good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
And we're going to be discussing bouncing back from calamity. We recently in Vermont had a pretty major flood, one of our devastating floods, and it's really shaken a lot of people. And this seemed like an apt opportunity to discuss bouncing back from calamity and general advice of things that we can do to help with that stress. So we'll get into conversation about different things there. It can be specific. We might be discussing things specific to the flood, but most of these will be generalizable to the challenges that people face. I kind of wanted to start off with just sort of stress and bouncing back from calamity and what that means to each of you. And underneath all this is Resilience Radio. So of course, bouncing back from calamity is a good definition of resilience. So I guess the question is, what does resilience mean to you? And I guess we can start with Josh.
To me, yes, life comes with challenges most days, and sometimes bigger ones like flooding or social ones, so we are often dealing with stressors that we have to sort of manage and bounce back from somehow. So I guess I'm thinking as I'm speaking, but to me, it's trying to keep a sense of ease through the storm of life, which to me takes practice each day. But it's sort of, in Chinese medical thinking, we have yin and we have yang. And we're trying to keep a balance between the two. And sometimes things are more intense, but we try to come back to a center and to create a sense of homeostasis. So it's natural to have a yang or a spike or a stress. And it's also natural to find our way back. So the goal is to find back to a sense of ease. That's where I go.
I love that. When I was coming up with the business name, it's Resilience. I was on a walk with my wife, and I was like, I want something that expresses dynamic equilibrium and homeostasis. And I'm like, but those are terrible names for a business. So dynamic equilibrium and homeostasis, resilience is what. So I feel like we're very much thinking in those same terms. Melanie, did you want to step in and?
Well, Josh so eloquently put that it's difficult to follow. But when I do think of resilience, or when I think of helping to build resilience in the people that I work with, it absolutely is that dynamic homeostasis, being able to make our way back to a healthy, sustainable point when maybe our stress reserves are maxed out or otherwise depleted. So some of the things that I'm working with when I'm working with people to build resilience is we figure out, how do we build a toolbox of things that they can go to bring themselves that ease that Josh spoke of. So a lot of the things that I'm making sure that the people that I work with are doing is what do we do for stress? How do we make sure that we're still getting rest? How do we make sure that we're still nourishing ourselves even when stressors are happening? And I think if we have those little building blocks and we check in with one another, that's one way that we can help folks to stay on the path to homeostasis. And, I don't look at that as a destination, obviously, because we're always going to have things that come into our path that are more stressful, and we're always going to have things that challenge us. But the idea is, do we have enough things in the toolbox that we can draw from and kind of keep steady so that we can maintain our well-being in the context of those things coming along the path?
You have anything you want to follow up and add to that, Rosemary?
Well, there's only not much to add because both Josh and Melanie spoke so beautifully of it. But, I would say the one thing, and Josh did mention this, and Melanie as well, but it's really the daily practice. It's like, it's very, very hard when you swing into that stressful place or there's these emergency things going on around you to reach into a toolbox if you haven't already built that toolbox, or to know how to do the practices that really lift you up. So really it's starting wherever we are and learning the practices and the tools that help keep us strong for those storms of life, which are always happening to different degrees. I think both Melanie and Josh said this, it's really, we have daily stressors that happen all the time. And then these massive things that happen either collectively or individually. And they often pop up without any warning. So, really it's really like a practice. If you try to utilize these things when you're under stressed or depressed, it's very, very difficult. So, yeah, I think it's just learning, on a daily level, the things that just make us feel better and stronger and more connected. And then I did want to just kind of build on what Melanie was saying, it's really a journey, this homeostasis thing. It's like, as soon as you reach that point of balance, it's like a really quick hello and goodbye. It really is it's homeostasis is almost imaginary. It's a place that we come to. It's a place of balance. You can almost feel it when you're there, either physically or emotionally. And then it also changes because life is constantly changing. So yeah, I think it's just, building the toolbox and then really learning to use those tools, but on a daily basis, so that when we really need to rely heavily on them, we know how to use them and we're stronger and more balanced to begin with.
I think I like the way you both talked about connection. I think you both said something about connection to others as one of those tools that we have. I think that, each person that we may work with or out in the world has to kind of find what works for them. And we may suggest something or a certain formula or a certain supplement or a certain idea like exercise or something that we suggest to them, but it doesn't always work for them. And we have to try to help them find what works for them, or maybe they'll create it themselves, but sort of support them in that way. And one big part, I think, is connecting to others that people often are attracted to, encouraging that to help bring them steadier each day, some connection.
I actually really like that you brought up connection in such an eloquent way, Josh, because that is, in my opinion, as from a relationship standpoint, from a practitioner to provider standpoint, I feel like the connection that one has with the people that we're working with, and the being with and being present with someone in a way that makes someone feel seen is kind of half of the healing process. I think that's half of the medicine, to be honest with you. But in doing that and creating that space where the person feels seen and heard and we are connecting, we're able to develop those toolboxes, develop those strategies that work best for people. And I think that's where the magic lies. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that's about half of the healing process, is having someone feel safe, heard, seen, and supported.
I agree fully.
Yeah, so true. I think that's one of the attractions that people have to more natural forms of medicine, because it's part of I think it's not only part of our training, I think it's part of who we are, is to want to hear and listen. I think the medical profession, the doctors in our allopathic system have that as well, but they're not given the time or even the practice to be able, or even taught how to do that. So it's not really part of that. And so you so often hear people who go to a regular doctor and they're not heard. It's like a 15-minute visit. So yeah, and then that connection with others, out in the world. I think right now loneliness, when we talk about calamity and depression and anxiety, loneliness is an enormous part of that, of not being connected, feeling disconnected from one another and the natural world. So whatever ways that we can as practitioners and as individuals is to help form that connection again, so that people, know that there are others there who are going to support them, especially during hard times. That was one of the things I loved about when the positive side of when this last storm happened, is the numbers of people that came together in the communities to help one another, right? It was pretty astounding.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was part of the healing for people, is to know that there was entires of communities, not only within Vermont, but also in the country, that were reaching out to be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people had this natural feeling to want to help others. It was like this thing inside them that like they wanted to help. They wanted to do something to help. And often we can't do anything, like what's happening in Gaza right now. I feel I can't really do much, but with our neighbors, we can do something. And I think people have this natural, like innate thing in them that they want to help other people who are struggling, which is sort of a beautiful thing. We got to see it,
Yeah, it is a beautiful thing. Humans are innately good. Most are really incredibly good. We're not reminded, and I think that feeds into this incredible sense of depression that so many people have these days, because we're not given enough information. It's not highlighted all the good things that people do every day for one another. And what's really focused, of course, on the news and everywhere that we look is the few bad people doing bad things. It's very, very imbalanced when we're looking at the world that way, and it definitely can make you feel depressed and anxious, right? Yeah.
Good point.
That was one of the reasons why in like 2019, I went back to school and did a master's of public health, because through all my years of practice in, one-on-one care, I noticed that it's so hard for people to maintain their wellness when the communities around them aren't supporting that. So I became really interested in widening the lens and working more towards community building. And so I don't know what I'm doing with that yet, but that's the direction that I would like to head in, doing wellness models that are community oriented to support, the individual work is still deeply important, but we have to build communities that support people staying healthy and, building and maintaining resilience and, finding that elusive yet worthy homeostatic point.
I think about there's two opportunities, or two places where we're using the tools or developing the tools for resilience, and we've spoken a good amount about sort of building community when things, sort of building up your toolbox when in advance, and we've also spoken to sort of the outpouring of support and connection that people naturally have there and their toolbox is there. So I guess there's sort of the preventative approach. How do you build up the reserves for calamity? And then there's what did we do and how do we come together during? And I'm happy to have you guys discussing either, but I wanted to sort of tease out that those are sort of different when you're under stress using the tools or developing the tools versus when you're not under as much stress, and what you guys see as the differences and how one would approach those differently. And you want to go, Rosemary?
I mean, I don't really see them as a whole really different. I think they're pretty much the same, like when you get a good set of tools, and that might be, a meditation practice, might be herbs that you're using. It might be, just your service in the community, whatever that is. For me, it's a lot of herbal work and working with individuals with plants, but it's different. As Josh had pointed this out, for individuals, it's very different choices that they make. But for me, it's like, you become allies with those plants and you learn to work with them. And then, yes, when you're under calamity or there's stress or there's, major trauma going on, you would use those plants differently, maybe more, you'd use them in smaller dosages more frequently, you'd use tinctures versus drinking your teas. In that sense, they would be different, but the herbs can be very much the same. For me, it's like, you learn a group of herbs. In this situation, when we're talking about resiliency and stress, I'd really focus on the herbs that are used for the nervous system, which really kind of strengthen our internal being and also on an emotional level, because as we know, and as we're learning more and more, plants don't just impact us on a physiological or chemical level. They're soulful beings that are also interrelating with us on these emotional and very deep levels. So I would really focus on the nervous system herbs and then also the adaptogens. Those are usually the two that I'm looking at when I'm looking at trying to help people lift their spirits and, lift up the depressive spirits that are weighing us down right now. And really getting to know those herbs. So like, I would just take a select group of herbs, for instance, like, skullcap and valerian and passion flower, chamomile, lavender. And, you use those in, like, generally I would say we're living in beautiful times, challenging times, and they're very stressful for people because of all the things going on, either in our personal lives or globally. And so using those in baths, doing infusions with them, I call it immersion and, immersing yourself and infusing yourself in these plant remedies, because the plants have learned resiliency, haven't they? They've been existing for thousands of years and adapting for thousands of years. So just using them, like getting up and having tea in the morning, taking an herbal bath, and then under times of duress and stress, you would really focus on the medicinal properties of them. So it's adjusting them somewhat, but my feeling is, again, there's it's really learning to use these things daily. Like, just for instance, like if all of a sudden you wake up and you say, oh, I need to exercise because I'm so unhealthy, it's much more challenging than just daily doing these daily movements and, going out and walking and gardening and incorporating it on a regular basis rather than waiting for that duress and stress to happen. So anyway, I don't know if that answered that, but that's what came to me.
Well, I was wondering if you could, if you were comfortable giving any specific recommendations regarding, you mentioned teas and baths, and if you have any, and I know these are general recommendations for folks, but if people want to start off with a simple tea or bath, do you have any?
I do,
dosage?
It's, herbs work individually for people, but there are formulas and there's herbs that are grouped that are just really helpful for people in stress. And one of my favorite remedies, and my favorite, I mean, it's been around a long, long time, but it's a formula of herbs that are really good for the nervous system and also are really good for building resiliency in the body. So I blend hawthorn, which is an herb for the heart. It's used as a cardiovascular tonic, but it's also used for grief and, lifting up sorrow from the heart. So I like to combine hawthorn, which is right at this time of year. It's blooming it's fruiting now. So it's time to go out and gather those hawthorn berries. I like to use the whole plant part, the leaf and the flower and the berries. And then I mix it with milky oats. The oats are really good for irritated nerves and nerve stress. And the milky oats are the green oats before they're fully ripened. I like to mix that with lemon balm, which is one of the most uplifting. It has a long history of being used for melancholy, which was depression, back in the medieval times. So I do, and then St. John's wort. I put a little St. John's wort in there because St. John's wort is used for mild depression, but it also helps to bring light into the being. It's a little sunny yellow flower, so it kind of captures the sunlight. And I love to make those into teas and just, have people drink 3 or 4 cups of that a day. Make a quart a day. I call it the cult group of people. You make a quart of your tea a day and you just drink 3 or 4 cups of that tea a day. And physiologically, chemically, it's doing its work on our nervous system and our heart. But I think what I find is these plants also are reaching down into the emotions. And really helping to lift our spirits. So really, literally thousands of people use that blend, and it's really helpful. It's a very uplifting blend. You can put it in your bath, though I usually just use roses or lavender, chamomile in baths. So herbal baths are another way of kind of deeply infusing your body. It's like a giant cup of tea. Take a bath and your pores open up and all those herbs go in and do their work. Simple little things, but they can be so relaxing and healing and uplifting. So,
Melanie, do you have any sort of preventative general recommendations that would be that would fall in that day-to-day toolkit?
Yes, my general practice focuses really heavily on the lifestyle factors that maintain that wellness. And so for most people, I'm kind of probably annoyingly dogmatic about checking in. Where are you with sleep? What are you doing daily for stress reduction, even if it's something small? And then we're individualizing that piece to the person, because for somebody, going to the gym might be that is their stress buster. For other people, they think, oh, I feel like a hamster in a wheel there, and that is a miserable scenario. So we figure out what works for that individual person, but I always look at sleep, movement, stress reduction, what things cultivate joy for you. For some people, that's being around other people and having more of a social connection. For other people, cultivating the joy is sitting with a cup of tea and writing in the journal and doing a little bit of more introverted style, self check-in. So I'm always looking for those things. What do you do to nourish yourself? When Rosemary was talking, it struck me that when she's speaking of how you're interacting with the herbs and, the energetics of the herbs and that connection with the herbs, even things like creating the ritual of utilizing the herbs for a certain effect, that's a self-care piece. So even little things where, we're thinking the herbs are doing all the work, but even the person choosing to take them and to make them part of their routine, that's embracing the self-care. So my approach is generally, what are we doing for self-care? And that's really hard to do when you feel like you're, especially when we think about, say, parents, we're rushing kids around to, we're chauffeurs, we're rushing kids around. We have to get 3 people to 3 different places at 3 different times in the day. And there's work demands, and then the self-care often takes a back seat. But the sort of reminder that I have for people that I'm working with is we have to plug those in. Even if they're small rituals, they need to become rituals. So I didn't answer your question very succinctly, but that is, if there's no cookbook for it, for me, we have to go, what are their unique challenges and what things can we cultivate and plug in on a daily basis that ease some of the burden?
Yeah, these ladies are hard to follow, but I think for people, they have to really find some joy. I mean, not everything is joyful that's nourishing, but if there is some pleasure or some joy, it really helps people get in the habit. Like that bath sounds really enjoyable and relaxing and pleasant, and for people to encourage themselves to do that each day or 3 times a week or whatever it is, or when I feel like doing that, and do it. I feel like doing that, and then actually do it is a way to take care of yourself. But I have found talking to people, if we can find something that they actually enjoy, and like you say, the hamster wheel thing is not usually joyful, but but some people that's what they have to do it. They just have to. They need 6 a.m. at the gym. But I don't know how sustainable. I worry about the sustainability and the fact that may be causing more stress and tension for their nervous system to have to get there at 6 o'clock instead of maybe following a more natural rhythm of their body. And people sort of lose touch with the natural rhythm of their body when they're just force themselves to do things, and that can be harmful, I think. So, yeah, I think we've gotten away maybe from your question, Irvin. I don't know. You were comparing like acute sort of, how to deal with acute stress versus, preparing and doing daily ritual. And Rosemary was talking about dosages. That's often a strategy for me, is like preventively we're using smaller dosages, you know, each day and during an acute state when they increase the dose of herbs. Same with acupuncture. People may come once a month as part of calming the nervous system and or supporting their digestive process or managing pain or something. But in a more acute state, I'll have them come weekly or maybe even more than once a week to deal with an acute condition.
If I may just add one thing to what Josh was saying too, is when it kind of struck me when he was talking about the exercise. And I think one thing that we haven't said yet is that people's connection to nature can be such a joyful thing in itself, and also such a reminder about resiliency, because nature is so remarkably resilient. The fires, the floods, whatever, the earth just goes on and it restores and rebuilds itself. And we are of the earth. And so when we spend time just reflecting on the earth and the natural cycles. So I just wanted to add that, those gym type exercises, and the machines and all that can be really effective for some people, and some people love them, right? But to me, it never replaces like life exercise, like just being outdoors and walking or stacking wood or, working in the garden, because you're not only moving your body, your spirit is definitely moving, and you're receiving all of the healing energy of nature that is pouring into us at every moment. So I just feel that that's another way that we not only build resiliency, but also build health and well-being, is by interacting with nature. And living in a rural place like we all do, it's fairly natural, but for so many people in the world right now, that disconnect is enormous. So, I think as much as we can, as who was it who said, we need the tonic of John Muir, we need the tonic of the wilderness, I think we need it more than ever, actually. So I just wanted to give a shout out for nature.
I wanted to add too, Rosemary, I think it's a great point. And it seems almost bizarre that we have to even talk about that we've become so disconnected from nature. We're all in these buildings right now. We sort of have separated ourselves, many of us, from nature, that we have to like remind ourselves to be part of it. And yet that's part of what we are. We are nature. And I do feel like it's part of where disease is coming from somewhat, is that separation we have. I mean, mentally, we've separated, and energetically, I don't know about energetically, but to some degree. So spending time in nature, reminding ourselves that we are resilient like those plants and those trees, and reconnecting with them, whatever that means, just being around them. For me, walking in the woods or wherever, you're just being around them, and it's infusing, and you remember that you're part of this, and you can get less separated from it.
Absolutely. It's funny because I would say I got here too late, but I'm making up for it. But growing up, I grew up in suburban Houston and was not, we laugh about it, I was really not outdoorsy. And it was only when I moved to Vermont that I really cultivated a deep appreciation and sense of connection with the natural world. So it was a little late, but I still got here. So I think that looking and reflecting on my health status from my younger years, which is when you think of yourself as more robust typically, to now, I think that's made all the difference in the world, that I feel connected to something, to the natural world, and also just to something outside of myself a little bit. I went to, this is a little bit of an aside, but I thought it was kind of interesting because as both of you were talking about it, there were threads of this. I listened to a lecture recently, and they were discussing the idea of hedonia, so the pursuit of pleasure, versus like eudaimonia, which is essentially happiness through the sense of like a larger, broader connection. And so I was thinking about that when we're talking about resilience, because there is this little quiz question that was describing this fellow that has grandchildren that I had to take for a quiz, describing a grandfather that gets the sense of meaning and purpose from watching his grandchildren each week, but he's having these health problems in this scenario. And they were talking about essentially all the things he did for the greater good that were meaningful to him, but there were still these little nagging issues. And the answer to the question on this quiz was, you have to give him a little hedonia. You have to give him a little pleasure. So it was something like, watching his favorite rerun for 20 minutes on TV because that was something that made him happy. And that sounds, we're trying to get away from media there, but that was his little pleasure. And so I think that ever since I took that silly quiz, I've been thinking about how do I also, a lot of us either we're missing one of those two, the hedonia, like this pure joy, and you had mentioned that, Josh, the pure pursuit of like this piece of joy. And that can be like, doing meaningful work and, feeling connected and plugged in on a more, like larger like scale. And then it also can mean doing something goofy like, playing ping pong or, just anything, that's like my little, there's no agenda to it. It's just a little bit of joy. And so I've been trying to, when we're thinking about resilience, I've been trying to think when I'm chatting with people and trying to help, I think, let's make sure we're plugging in, that eudaimonia, that big meaning, but also, how do we tap into those little mini pleasure pursuits? Because they matter too.
I love that as an OT who's often thinking in terms of occupation being meaningful activity, I love that that's the direction that this has sort of gone into. Like what is meaningful to us? Like that's the that's the whole definition for occupational therapy. I was wondering, and I know that Melanie, speaking of sort of life stresses and and having to run around and chauffeur, I know Melanie needs to leave fairly soon, and we'll continue the conversation. But I was wondering if we could jump into, and Melanie brought this up a little while back, sleep specifically. If anyone has any more concrete recommendations or descriptions of different challenges people might have with sleep during challenging times.
Well, I would like to just say with that, I think that when we talk about stressful times, sleep is just critical. And it's just unbelievable how many people don't sleep well anymore. I mean, it actually is really believable because we actually created habits that prevent sleep, even for people who sleep well and aren't what we call really stressed out. Having, looking at screens, whether they're TV or looking at the iPads or whatever, are absolutely known to be sleep disruptors. So oftentimes you find when you're talking to people who have a lack of sleep, just aren't sleeping well and there's, a whole spectrum of what not sleeping well means and how different people are affected by it. But one of the very first things is just, asking if they are doing screen time at night before going to bed. So that what I would say would be really critical is you shut those screens off at least an hour before, and then you read. Reading is really relaxing to the mind, even if it's a stimulating book. You take that herbal bath again. That's a really perfect time, put nervines, relaxing herbs like chamomile and lavender in. And then there's some wonderful herbs that are both stress reducing and then also are really help, they really help with sleep. I usually start with the milder ones, and I don't really recommend people drink tea right before bed because they'll wake up at 3 or 4 hours later having to pee. So, having your chamomile tea or your lemon bod tea early in the evening, like, at least 2 or 3 hours before you go to sleep, not having anything stimulating. Like for people who can't sleep well, to do a lot of stimulation before bedtime agitates the nerves, even if it's exciting stimulation. Now here I'm not talking about necessarily watching bad movies, but anything that overexcites you, then your whole nervous system is all alert, right? And you don't want to go to sleep. So it's, you're thinking about kind of sedating yourself with, just quieter music, maybe some really good reading material, nice herbal bath, and then taking these teas, there's lots of sleepy time teas on the market these days, and they almost all are comprised of very similar herbs. Like, you'll see ashwagandha, tulsi, lemon balm, chamomile, and then having tinctures. Like I love this sleep formula that it's a mixture of hops and valerian, and making that into a tincture so you can take it right at bedtime. And then if you wake up at night, you could take a little bit more to help you sleep. And this little sleep formula isn't going to work for people who are really, really stressed out and have been for a long time. But it's a very, very helpful protocol for people who are just having sleepless nights or just anxious, like a cycle. Then that works really well. And as I mentioned, and I'm sure Josh and Melanie could add more about this, is, there's all kinds of sleepless disorders now. It's remarkable, because I don't think, if we were to look back at old books or old medical textbooks, sleep disorders were an issue, but nothing like we're seeing today. I think Josh and Melanie would both agree with me. So hand it over. I know you both have really good suggestions.
I don't know, Melanie, you got to go. Did you want to say something, or?
Well, I laugh because sleep, I'm one of those parties that has always had, that is my biggest challenge, is sleep. So as a not as a practitioner, but as the human on the other side of that table, sometimes that has been one of my challenges. But luckily, because of that toolbox that we talked about, I've managed to personally put in a lot of different options. It's sort of my menu of options of things that help me to maintain better sleep. And for people that truly have sleep disorders, you always want to, of course, rule out the medical causes, like people that truly have like sleep apnea, for example. We always need to make sure we're checking for things like that, because that can have long-term deleterious health effects for folks. For people that truly have those, sometimes we have to take actually a little bit different approach. But if it's someone who struggles because of chronic stress, you have to go back to the roots of that and figure out, how do we bail the bucket a little bit and decrease some of that burden. And so, I work a lot with folks with creating ritual, and then we just figure out what's the cause, what's keeping you up. Is it something physical? Is it something emotional? And then, we figure out from there, how do we build a plan that's going to support them differently and create new rituals that are supportive and hopefully help them to reset the body, so that, sometimes it's a matter of, sleep hygiene plays a role, but usually there's a lot more to it. So sleep hygiene, meaning, we have darkening curtains. We, don't expose ourselves to our phones at a certain time, those basic sleep hygiene measures that most people know, but don't always practice. Those are important, but usually there's more to it, and we have to get to the root of, what's keeping somebody up.
Yeah, I think lack of sleep is a stress itself, It's a form of stress, lack of sleep. And then being stressed or having anxiety disrupts sleep. So I agree, Rosemary, it's like an epidemic of our modern time. So many people, it's sort of uncommon to find somebody who says, I sleep well. I go to sleep easy. I sleep for 8 hours. I don't wake up at all in those 8 hours, and then I wake up and I feel refreshed. It's sort of uncommon to hear people talk about that. People, they of course they get up to pee, or something disturbs them. A lot of people are sensitive to the environment. If it's not dark enough, or if there's a sound, or their partner moves, or it's not cold enough, they have a hard time, or their feet are too cold. So I find a lot of people are sensitive. I wanted to add the sort of Chinese medical kind of view. I don't know if this makes sense, but I think about it a lot when people talk about sleep. In Chinese medicine, in Chinese medical language, they use the word shen. Shen means, like, in English would mean like consciousness or attention, like focus, attention, consciousness, the mind is a way to say it. That's the way I think of it. So they say that the shen should be anchored or settled. The settling of the shen or anchoring of the shen is healthy sleep. And when the shen isn't anchored, we see difficulty with sleep, or we see tendency for overfocus. Like if you overfocus on your fear, that may be considered as type of anxiety. When you have anxiety, or if you actually have attention deficit, it's hard to focus on a topic, or if there's depression, or this is all kind of considered sort of a shen disturbance or a lack of settling of shen. This is Chinese medical language, and there are certain acupuncture points and herbs as well that we know can help sort of settle the shen. There's one right there on the wrist. Maybe you're familiar. I'm trying to figure out which way to turn my arm, right? This one, it's called, there's one right there. I'm thinking of this one by this outer bone. It's on the heart channel. It's called Shen Men. I can't figure out how to turn. Yeah, right? There's one here, central, right? And then there's one, I guess this isn't video. We're not helping our listeners. This is just for us. But we call that Shen Men, and it means the gate of the Shen. So it can help sort of calm the Shen just by stimulating this particular point. How that affects maybe the vagus nerve or the nervous system in a more modern way, we're still discovering this. But some of these points, like that middle one on the wrist, we do know affects the vagus nerve and can help stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to calm, to rest. That's more modern thinking. I just thought I'd add that interesting sort of perspective, the metaphor of the Chinese medicine, like the rocking boat. Even at nighttime, if it's anchored, it may move a little bit. It may have an environment. It may be wind outside, but it doesn't wake you up. You know what I mean? Because it's anchored. I don't know how to say that. So the goal is to keep people settled better. We know about brainwave activity and all this, but it surely is a challenge. And I often use, there's a good herb in Chinese medical thinking called ziziphus. I don't know, is that a familiar herb? And I think it's a Chinese herb. It's kind of in shape of like a bean. It's called ziziphus. We call it swanzao ren in Chinese, and it's commonly used to sort of help sort of settle and anchor. And so the people who have anxiety that's wrapped into their, like they know they're anxious during the day, and they see how it's tied into their sleep. I'll often recommend that herb in a formula. There's a particular formula called Swanzao Ren Tang or Ziziphus formula. I find that to be helpful for people who have that anxiety piece.
Yeah, that would be like the Chinese, it sounds like the Chinese equivalent of kava, which is what the herb that I would use. It's not necessarily a Western herb. It actually is more of a tropical, comes from the tropics, but it is really, really good for anxiety, in small amounts. There's so many herbs, it's like incredible. And like, I think Melanie had pointed this out, you kind of have to find the herbs that really work for you. But usually when you do, they'll work really well when you find a formula or an individual plant. And I was just pointing out, people have been working with plants for literally millions of years, so there's this very deep old connection, and there's so many different plants. So it's really, trying the plants, you find that formula, that one that's really helpful. Oftentimes it's what's growing in people's backyard. That's the thing that's so lovely, that different connection. I guess I wanted to point one other thing out, Josh, that you kind of made me think about is I think about how it is that our nervous system has evolved over millions of years, but we haven't really evolved to receive all the amazing amounts of information that we're able to receive now in a very short time, both what we perceive, through reading our emails or listening to the news, but also what we don't see, which is all that airwaves running through. And it's not like there haven't been energetics forever, like electrical impulses from nature have always been charging the air, and we're receptors of that. But we haven't had the electrical impulses and information charging through the air that we have now. And we're receptors of all of that. It's like going right through our heads, right? And I can't help but think that it has some negative impacts for us because it's new, like in the last 20 or 30 years, max, really more like the last 10 or 15 years, that there's been this massive amount of disruption in the airways is what I kind of see it. So I'm not saying that there isn't always been, the air is just filled with millions of things we don't see, but it's nature, it's like the impulses of nature, the wind or whatever. But what's passing now is like emails, just, I don't mean literally, but it's a million messages flying through the sky, and we're the interceptors of that, like the telephone poles that this information's zooming through. And that just has to impact us in some way that we haven't really even explored.
Yeah, you think about ourselves as an electrical system, and how that information you're talking about is affecting our electrical system, including our brains and hormones output. And yeah, it's interesting. I like the way to think about how we've evolved. Like we've evolved as humans on the planet with the plants. We've been next to them. We've evolved with them, and it's interesting. I often say that to people, how they have a genetic code. We have a genetic code. We've evolved together. When we incorporate that into our system, it's a safe, it's a natural exchange. It's different than sometimes medication can be. It's interesting to look at it in that way. So I like to think about, how we're evolving. And like you're saying, the things that we're creating, the human body hasn't necessarily adapted to. And we may be seeing some of the effects of that in our sleep patterns.
Well, I think for certain we are, Melanie used that word. I forget what she said right now, but she was just talking about, like the darkening the rooms, making sure there's no lights coming in.
Sleep hygiene.
Sleep hygiene. Yeah, I thought that was quite a great term for it. I never heard that term, but yeah, I mean, those things can be really helpful for people. At least a first step that can be taken. But it is enormous because, when you do get a good night's sleep, it just is amazing how good people can feel from that. Like good night's sleep and a good hike and a nice meal, it does wonders for people, right?
Perfect day. That's it.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was just talking to a friend the other day, actually a really close friend, who's very conscious about her health and her well-being. She takes a lot of supplements, and she goes, if I just eat well and exercise, I don't need to take those supplements. I feel better, and I think it's true for most people, but those basic things are difficult and challenging, good night's sleep, it's a good form of exercise that really revitalizes us, and a good meal that makes us feel grateful to be eating it. That's really kind of the best medicine. And yet it's a challenge for people.
Yeah,
right?
It's so interesting that how that's become so challenging for us, talking about public health, like Melanie talking about public health. I mean, how could we make that less challenging for people? To sleep well, to make a good meal for themselves, or to get some exercise. Somehow our modern lives have made it challenging. And some of it is out of our control, like this information going around us. And some of it is in our control, but it's hard. And I do think the modern lifestyle has really made it challenging to keep a healthy sense of health. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's so interesting with that. Two things when you just said that, one, again, it's about those daily practices. Like if we learn to turn our palates to things that we know are more healthy for us, and that's a really broad spectrum for people, all the way from, the keto diets and the vegetarian, it's really individual for people to find the diet. We say, diets are very individual, and it's the diet that makes you wake up in the morning and go, smile at the day, like the Taj Mahal song. You can wake up and feel good about a new day and excited about what's ahead of you and energized without having to go and drink a cup of coffee. Then you've probably found a diet that's really working for you. And that will change with the cycles of our life. But, basically, but to put those things into practice, like to turn our, to remind ourselves to go out and exercise with nature and work and garden, and then to find those herbs that are really feeding our souls and our bodies in the ways that we need, so that we have this repertoire ready, so that when we do hit stress, and I say that with a lot of personal experience, because I've basically, tried to live my life this way since I was a young woman. And I hit a really hard wall about 3 years ago when I had the closest people in my life, all three of them just died right in the same year. And it really sent me spiraling, right? Like I was down in those dark places, and I had the tools. I knew enough to be able to turn to those tools. And then I had the support of friends and family and community. So we talked a lot about that, of trying to create these good habits also includes trying to build support in a community so that we're integrated into that community. And again, that happens when we're feeling okay. It happens when we're feeling good, better than waiting till the stress comes down on us. We know it will. It's life. Everybody is going to hit those stress buttons. It's just, life is a cycle, and it goes up and down, and sometimes really down and sometimes really up. But it's our task to try to help one another create healthy habits so that we put them into practice, because they make us feel good every day, and then they help us when we are not feeling good every day.
So we've talked a lot about building the habits and routines and building the toolbox, and so that when we do venture into more stressful situations, we have those tools. And we talked about sort of the things outside of our control, the electromagnetics, and just the environment that we're in, the fact that it's tricky to find the time to make yourself a meal and go for the hike with the sort of a lot of the modern distractions and things sort of and pressures on us. So I feel like many people might be like, yeah, well, I wish I had time for self-care and to do these things. And yes, there's small things they can do to start building up that, and we've discussed that. The people feel like I worry that some people might hear this and be like, well, I don't think I'll ever have time to build up this reserve. Do you have any practical tools for me right now that I'm in this stressful situation? Does that just mean I'm up the creek because because I don't have the reserve in the community? What would you say for those people to sort of give them a glimmer of hope or something to help with self-care if they feel like they don't have those reserves?
Yeah, such a good point.
This is a good shift for our focus. I mean, it's like I would ask them, do you take a walk during the day? Is that something you would enjoy? If are you not taking a walk? Is it something you would enjoy to take a walk? For me personally, that's like an important part of my day, taking a walk. Sometimes it's before I come into the office. Sometimes it's with my wife and the dog after dinner. Sometimes it's in the middle of the day, but so I would suggest, like, does taking a walk sound attractive to you? And how can you fit it in your day? I mean, seriously, how can you adapt your day to fit in a 20-minute walk? That may be a starting point. You can take it from there, Rosemary.
Yeah, and then I would always say there's, herbs are always available. You can start by looking in your spice cabinet, for instance, because you have things like cinnamon that is very healing, and rosemary and thyme that help, really excellent for helping to lift the spirits, or all the herbsters that are available, of having these blends, because the herbs, we've mentioned this a few times, we have evolved in relationship to the plants, and they're healing medicine for us physiologically and on every level. And there's a huge amount of information available. So, I don't know, herbs, I mentioned this earlier, like in times of stress, the two herb groups generally that I would recommend, and, as Melanie pointed out this really clearly, is that, it's individual for each person. But if I was just to say the two groups I would really look at are herbal nervines that both feed, nourish, fortify the nervous system, and have a long history of doing that, and they do that in a multitude of ways. And then the adaptogens, which are herbs specifically geared to help people adapt to the stresses of modern day life. And they're really restorative for the body. They help restore vitality. So some of those are readily available, like herbs like tulsi and licorice root. Those are licorice, especially if people are like really frightened and have worn out their adrenals, right? Because licorice is really restoring to the adrenals. I mentioned kava earlier. Kava really classifies more as a nervine herb, but it's incredible for people who have anxiety. And, you know, I like to always point out, not every herb works for every single person, but in general, kava is an incredible herb when there's a lot of anxiety happening. And, you know, I generally tend to tell people to stay away from the herbs that are really stimulating and the foods that are really stimulating when you're in a lot of anxiety and stress, and just because they just agitate the nervous system. They're good if you need a lot of energy, but they also can be really agitating. So working on the herbs that are more calming, they help us to feel grounded and centered. So a mild herb like chamomile is very fortifying and very grounding. Lemon balm is soothing to the nervous system and also uplifting to the spirits. And then lavender is another one that has a long history of being used for grounding and quieting and for the nervous system. I mentioned valerian and hops. There's a couple of others, skullcap and passion flower, that help their sedatives. They help people kind of relax, and they're mild. They're not like drugs. None of these herbs that I've mentioned are drug-like in their action. They're all effective, but mild in how they're working in the body. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just important. And if people don't have these in their herb closet or, you know, in their, you know, their kitchen cupboards, I would say, oh, it's a good thing to add, because it's always good to have them. But we have availability pretty readily. You know, there's herb stores and online sources now so people can get the herbs and herbal information as well. But you have to be really, really mindful. I always like to put a little warning out about, you have to be very mindful about trying to get your herb information off the internet, because there's some good information out there, but there's more bad. So it's better to look at good herb books and use those as your resources, or talk to the herbalist at an herb store. So yeah, I think and then we mentioned too, you know, like I think Melanie talked about the lifestyle things, you know, like of trying to eat. And that's really difficult when you're under a lot of stress. A lot of times people forget to eat. They don't want to cook. If they want to eat anything, they eat sugar because they have no energy. Often they just feel depleted, and sugar would be not the best thing. You know, sweet foods would not be the best thing to eat when you're under a lot of stress, because of the physiological things that go on when your body's trying to digest that sugar. It's not a good thing to do to your body when you're under a lot of stress. So trying to have things, you know, like for people who eat meat, having some good meat handy, or chicken, because it's very grounding, very fortifying to the body. For vegetarians, like, you know, the miso, all of the vegetarian proteins. I just can't emphasize enough eating a lot of protein and calcium when you're under a lot of stress, because it feeds the nervous system and it grounds us. We're eating a lot of rich, sugary type foods. Even a lot of fruit, which I love, can also it feeds the body with a lot of sugar, and then this kind of excess spinning like energy. I don't know if I'm making sense, but you know, the same thing like what Josh was saying, if you could take, you know, 10 minutes or 20 minutes a day and just go out and walk in nature, having a warm cooked meal, having a warm cup of tea, and then an herbal bath can be so grounding in times of anxiety and stress. And they're simple, doable things for most people. So
I think the key is to try to, make them simple and doable, you know. And sometimes it does take some preparation ahead of time, like having make the soup for the week so you can have easy access to the soup. But I think there's so much happening in most people's lives that they do. Like for me, I would like a nice hour to prepare a meal. That would be, you know, a nice hour, a chunk of time, which often I do, and it works out great. But a lot of people don't necessarily, for dinner, I'm going to prepare from 4 to 5 or from 5 to 6. And that's what I do every day. And I take the space and I prepare for the meal, and I look forward to preparing the meal and eating it. And that's a nice mindset to have. It would be nice if people's lives could somehow be that way, and they valued it in that. So sometimes you really have to talk to people and find out, try to help them, take care of themselves in that way and see the value in it and the joy in it. And like you were talking about the herbs, and I think just the act of preparing the herbs, or even just putting a tea bag or just drinking a cup of tea, is an act of taking care of yourself. It's different than just taking a pill, or even like an herbal supplement. I often give people capsules, with herbs. It's easier for them, but actually drinking the tea, I'll use the granular form too. Drinking the tea of granules, it's like space. It's a ritual. It's a space to do this thing, and you're actually taking care of yourself in that moment. And it just can help people get that perspective a little bit.
Yeah, so I was wondering if I feel like we've covered a lot of great territory. If someone was in a real stressful situation, like they're currently dealing with getting water out of their basement, or the fire is coming, or someone has just died, and they've got maybe 30 seconds for self-care right now, and they've got you right next to them, and they look to you for a piece of advice. What do you got for them?
I would give them a huge hug. 30 seconds, huge hug. Pour the love I have in my heart out to them, and give them rescue remedy in 30 seconds. It's not much time.
Okay, so rescue remedy is a real, and a hug from someone goes a long way.
A hug and a helping hand.
Yeah, I tend to think that way too. Having somebody else there with you. I'm not going to really pull out my acupuncture needles or maybe I would press on. I don't even think I'd press on their points, particular points, but I may be touching them. So another human being going through it somehow with you can ease something. I didn't experience that loss with you, but I'm here with you in this moment, and I care about you. And I may touch you on the shoulder, just saying, I'm with you. Or if we have to run together out of the flood, we're going to run together. I'm going to be next to you. So I guess what I'm saying, like Rosemary, is use your love and your heart to stand with them and do this thing together.
And I would add, for people who don't have someone standing with them, that when you need to, you got to reach out so that people know that you need that touch and that love, that there are people available even when it doesn't feel like it.
We were saying earlier that people do want to help. They actually want an opportunity to help other people. So give them, they want to.
I think that's so true. I think that I was going to just add to that there's a lot of resources now available, much more as we're moving through these really stressful times. There's so many individuals and organizations that are available, and it's difficult for people often to reach out, but there are people there on the other end who do want to help.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. That was fun.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you for having us. Yeah.
That was Melanie Myers, Rosemary Gladstar, and Josh Singer speaking to us about bouncing back from Calamity. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Resilience Radio. I know I did. If you did, you can subscribe via the podcatcher of your choice and get a new conversation almost every week. The music was brought to you by Aaron Marcus with their tune Some Biological Process. You can check the show notes for full credits on that. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.